TCL is a proud sponsor of the 1500 ESPN studios. TCL, America's fastest growing TV brand. Minnesota Vikings, the NFL, football. Yeah, football. Welcome to Purple Podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Purple Podcast. Matthew Coller here, along with former NFL quarterback Sage Rosenfels, who was in attendance for last night's 30-20 loss by the Minnesota Vikings against the New Orleans Saints. So the big conversation this morning, I'm sure you're not surprised by this, Sage, is around Kirk Cousins and his performance and his key interception. So I am going to give you the floor here. Give me all of your thoughts at once about what Kirk Cousins did last night and the Vikings' loss about the Saints. What's the first thing that was on your mind this morning?
Well, the first thing that hit me were just the two turnovers. I think that was the difference in this game. You look at the final score, 30-20, and the Vikings are up in the first half, rolling about to possibly score a touchdown at the worst, a field goal, and next thing you know, Adam Thielen fumbles, and the whole game completely turns around, followed by the pick six, which I don't think was, Kirk Cousins' fault. Stephon Diggs, I don't know why, but he stopped on the route. They call that a shallow crossing route. And on those routes, it's versus man-to-man coverage, you stay on the move, versus zone, a lot of times you hook up, and find a soft spot in the zone on these little 5-yard crossing routes. Well, that was obviously man-to-man coverage from the pre-snap all the way through. And as Cousins was sort of moving in the pocket, trying to find some space, Diggs, I think, just stopped to try to sort of give him a place to throw the ball, and Cousins actually led him and basically hit the DB in stride, and that was the end of that. 6 points going the other way. So, yeah, of all the games to really, rag on Kirk Cousins for a crappy performance or a performance that cost the Vikings, this is not the one to choose. And he's played better, he's played worse. But these, those two turnovers, I don't think were his fault. Now, some of the sacks and some of the other things I can put on Cousins, but I don't think those are the deciding outcome in this game.
So what's interesting to me about Cousins is that there have been so many turnovers and confusing plays by him this year. Almost you go game by game, and there's 1, 2, 3 each game, that you start to say it's not really about whether that one was his fault or this one was his fault. We did the same thing with the Rams. Was the fumble his fault? Was it Riley Reif's fault? Should he have stepped up? Should he have not stepped up? But the trend from 2015 to present is this sort of thing, that when it's a big situation or when there's an opportunity to win a big game against a really good team, that there are too many times where these things happen. And I'm starting to wonder, is there enough here with this Vikings team to paint over some of those mistakes? Because I think that was the theory in signing him. We focus very much on the money, but as you've mentioned on the podcast many times, that it's supply and demand with him. He got paid because he was the only quarterback out there, not because it's on a scale of which guy deserves which amount of money based on their talent. But I don't think when you're missing that many players on defense, or when you make other mistakes on offense like that fumble, that you can cover up for some of Kirk Cousins' shortcomings.
Yeah, there does seem to be just there's something just sort of missing, with Kirk's play overall. There seems to be that crucial play, as you said, once, maybe twice a game, that really costs them, whether it's a sack, fumble, or just a bad sack at the wrong time. That was the issue with Case Keenum last year. He would make a lot of great plays during the game, and then there'd be about 2 plays that you would just say, that was a really boneheaded interception or a really bad play, him trying to do too much. I think that might be one of the things Kirk does, is he tries to do too much, and sometimes that sometimes it's successful, and other times it sort of comes back to haunt him. So yeah, him getting paid $28 million, to me, that's all supply and demand. That doesn't bother me at all how much the Vikings actually paid him. That really has nothing to do with it. There's very rarely do good quarterbacks get out in the free agent market. He was a good quarterback out in the free agent market. I think he's probably a top 10, top 12 guy in the league. And so he was going to get paid, really, really well. And the Vikings gave him all that money. And that's, they gave him less money than the Jets were going to give him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I realize the Jets are at $30 million a year and the Vikings offered 28. So, again, you can't put the whole game on Kirk Cousins. The quarterback always gets the blame for the losses and all the credit for the wins. He played pretty good in this football game. And he said he can play better, but the team can play better as well. They got to get some turnovers on defense. As I said before, those 2 turnovers offensively, those are not on Cousins.
So there are a few other things in this game in particular that I want to get to, but while we're on the topic of Kirk Cousins, after the game, he, on the interception, went with the similar line that he used in Los Angeles when he fumbled, which was, "You tell me," to the reporter when he was asked about it, and then we're going to keep it internal and that type of thing. Meanwhile, his wide receiver was taking responsibility at his locker for the mistake and saying that he shouldn't have stopped. So he's confirming what you thought last night, shouldn't have stopped, and that's not what he's supposed to do on that route, but maybe he was just trying to find a spot as things were breaking down. So anyway, it was interesting to me that once again there's a crucial mistake, and Cousins doesn't have a whole lot of things to say about it and kind of forces somebody else to take the responsibility. When you had this happen during your career, even if something wasn't your fault that was a mistake, did you take responsibility for it anyway at the podium? I mean, how did you handle these things, and what do you think of the way he's handled them?
It's Darren Doogie Wolfson here from 5 Eyewitness News, and I contribute to 1500 ESPN. The goal is to always have more scoops than Raisin Bran. I pride myself on being up to date on what's happening with the Wolves, Wild, Twins, Vikings, Gopher Sports, the Lynx, United, and everything else going on in this busy sports marketplace. Check out the Scoop Podcast. You can find The Scoop on Apple Podcasts, Podcast One, or wherever you happen to get your podcasts.
Yeah, I was taught during my college days. I did an internship one time for like a financial company down in Des Moines, Iowa, and I became fairly good friends with the CEO of the company. He ended up being sort of a mentor of mine, and one thing he said to me, when you're talking about your football team or when he talks about his company, it's always we, always. It's never I or he with a negative. It's always we. So if, even if the quarterback throws an interception or somebody else fumbles, it's always we. Football is the ultimate team sport. And, that might be something that, maybe would help, Kirk, in particular with the media. You're always looking for something to scrutinize. He's a guy that everyone likes to scrutinize. That's the position of the quarterback. But, I'm all about trying to use we as much as possible. We got to get on the same page. You can blame Stephon Diggs if you want to, but those two together, have to be on the same page. And, that's probably some of the growing pains of a quarterback coming here for the first time, first year, and guys just not being, all those little intricacies of, and little details of, the quarterback wide receiver, position and trying to be on the same page. And obviously they weren't on that play.
Yeah. It seems like just taking a defensive stance there when you're the guy with the ball and you're the one who threw it, and the nuances of it matter a lot less, I think, when that question is being asked. Like, yes, I think we can all agree that they weren't on the same page with what Diggs was doing in that moment, and maybe Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown on that same play know exactly where each other's going to be because they've played together forever, and maybe that is the case. You could talk about it all day and look at the film and everything else, but the end result was you, the quarterback, threw the ball into the other team's hands and lost your team the game. And so it has really struck me that other quarterbacks who have stood in that same position have said, yeah, I can't make that throw, or like you're saying, that we need to be on the same page there, or we can't make that crucial mistake. And instead it was, you tell me. And that's just, it's like what's the book, like How to Win Friends and Influence People? Like, that's not in that book.
Yeah. This is not, something he's not an all pro sort of media connoisseur. I will say that there's aspects of Cousins that, some people could probably even call almost unlikable. And you probably ask the Washington Redskin fans, they might, say, hey, we told you so. This is probably some of the things that bothered them, over the last, 3 or 4 years when Kirk was starting for them. But, I think you'd look at the broader picture. Cousins played good football in this game. He's 31 of 41 for 359, 2 touchdowns. I know some of those yards, in the fourth quarter came as they're, trying to come back, and they're getting softer defenses and easier completions were there. But at the end of the day, the Vikings offense put up pretty good amount of yardage. They ran the ball okay. Only rushed 22 times in this game. Latavius had 13 for 56 for, over 4.0 average. I thought they could have ran the ball more, something that we've been talking about now for a few weeks. Defensively, you have to be happy. They gave up like 230 yards of offense. I mean, just incredible. They held Drew Brees to 120 yards of passing. That's incredible. And they gave up 106 on the ground. So, overall, I think you got to be fairly happy with this football game. It's just those crucial mistakes that killed them. And when you have two really evenly matched teams, I think two teams that are, probably two of the top 4 or 5 teams in the NFC, two big turnovers that really turn into 14 points. That's going to be the deciding outcome in a game. And that's what happened last night.
Well, I think that it's really fascinating, that game, from that standpoint, that in a lot of different ways, they outplayed the New Orleans Saints, especially early, where Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen were just dominating that game. They flat out took over the game early, and if Thielen doesn't fumble the ball, touchdown or field goal, maybe that's different. But when it comes to the mistakes, it isn't just Kirk and Thielen on this one. Also, Laquon Treadwell, Sage. I mean, I think we are getting to the point where you're talking about liability in a lot of ways. I mean, so there weren't any like key drop passes like there were earlier this year, but it seems to be under the category of always something. And a 15-yard penalty in that situation just cannot happen. They get the ball at the 33, the Saints. You could stop them. You might get a missed field goal the way that the defense was playing, or even a field goal is okay in that situation. It can't be a touchdown. You give them 15 free yards, put Drew Brees in the red zone, and it's almost automatic. And I guess what struck out to me is that Treadwell wasn't taken off the field for that, but earlier this year, Xavier Rhodes was for kicking a flag. And I guess I'm just thinking that that's a little bit curious considering both players' histories.
Yeah, at some point here, I don't know what to really say about Laquon Treadwell. I mean, early in the year, as you're watching the film, you see him make mistakes of what route he's running. He was dropping passes earlier in the year. To be a guy who's the third or fourth, wide receiver on the roster, and to be taking, personal foul penalties for really no reason, had not that much to do with him. It wasn't like he dropped the pass or he made some key mistake. And I'm not really even sure what to say about him at this point. He's a first rounder. He's being beat out by 2 stars who are undrafted in a 5th rounder. He's supposed to have more talent than those guys, and maybe physically he does, but mentally and emotionally. He is, far, far behind Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, 2 superstars on this football team. So, I love that Aldrick Robinson has been getting a little bit more playing time than they've been going after him a little bit more, trying to get him the ball. I'm hoping going forward that he's the number 3 guy, because I'm just sort of, probably like a lot of Vikings fans, just sort of done with Laquon Treadwell. You just can't have mistakes like that, just boneheaded, sort of immature, type of mistakes. Again, when you're playing against a team who, very well could be in the NFC Championship game, one of the best teams in the NFC, one of the best teams in the NFL, when games are that close, talent-wise and coaching-wise and player-wise, the whole thing, these 15-yard penalties that are just based out of immaturity, those are just unacceptable. And
also file something under head scratching with going to Treadwell on a 4th and 1, where, spreading things out and sneaking it is a proposition like 90% that you usually get it. If you just spread it out and sneak, it's what New England has done for years. I have no idea why everyone doesn't copy it, but so let's say you don't want to do that. You got 2 of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Like you mentioned, Aldrick Robinson seems to have some chemistry. Throwing the ball to Latavius Murray is legal and allowed. And I think he can catch it. So, Kyle Rudolph is the guy for 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1 to me. Just give him the ball for a yard on a play action or something. It's worked a million times. And yet, Laquon Treadwell is the one who gets the target there. And the throw wasn't that accurate, and it was a great play by Marshawn Lattimore. But in that case, it was a key play in the game. It was where they could have been marching to get back in it, and instead they end up giving the ball back to Brees there because of, to me, just a bad decision.
Lucky's 13 Pubs has you covered for the best game day experience this football season. Tons of TVs, legendary appetizers, amazing fresh half-pound burgers, handcrafted sandwiches, and a wide variety of other pub favorites. The drink menu is awesome, too. Huge selection of tap beer, handcrafted cocktails, and the best Bloody Marys in town. Seriously, these Bloodies are awesome. Try the Bacon Bloody, the Jalapeno Bloody, the Mother Mary, or just get a flight and try them all. Plus, Lucky's 13 celebrates Sunday Fun Day. Happy hour all day long on Sunday, every Sunday. Events and prize giveaways during games, too. Lucky's 13 has locations in Bloomington, Burnsville, Mendota, Plymouth, and Roseville. Having people over for the game? Call ahead to Lucky's and order some of those legendary apps, and they'll be ready to bring home when you get there. It's football time at Lucky's 13 Pubs. Find them online at luckys13pub.com. luckys13pub.com. It's the most wonderful time of the year, football time. And Lucky's 13 Pubs has you covered for the best game day experience. luckys13pub.com.
Yeah, that was, I think, maybe one of the worst. I think like that Kirk Cousins decision was much worse than, the interception, some of the plays that happened in the game. Mm-hmm. Again, you're going to your third, fourth receiver who's been very inconsistent for you. You sort of never know what you're going to get, and go it against Lattimore, who's one of the best young corners in the game, and sort of a key play of the game. You got to look at matchups, and in those situations, you're going to get man-to-man coverage. So you got to look at your best matchup. There's Thielen looked like to me he was open on that play. Robinson was definitely open on that play for a 4 or 5 yard gain. I think Laquon Treadwell, that was probably the last place on the football field that I would choose to go.
So how do you think on the other side of the ball they handled having a bunch of guys out on defense? Xavier Rhodes, surprising, was out. There was a report early in the day that he was going to play, but then it turned out that he didn't. Linval Joseph was limited a bit. Everson Griffin played but didn't play the whole game and was clearly, I think, shaking the rust off a little bit, and then missing Anthony Barr as well. It seemed to me, Sage, that they did a really good job overall, but at the same time, we talk about situational football, and the Saints had the lead, and they did not let the Vikings back in the game.
Yeah, defensively, when you watch this game, the Vikings played a different style than they're used to playing. They played a lot of zone coverage, a lot of too high safety coverage, that did allow the Saints to get some decent runs, 4, 5, 6 yard runs on first down. I actually talked to Drew Brees after the game in the Saints locker room. We talked about, I asked him if he thought, or Sean Payton, if they thought they could run the football on the Vikings. I feel like I've seen that this year. A lot of 5 yard runs, 6 yard runs, just some nice push by opposing offensive lines on this Vikings defensive line. And he said, well, listen, you're playing the Vikings. You never want to be in third and long situations with Hunter and the pass rush that they have. So you really try to stay out of those. So for them, it was like, it's okay to run on first and second down, be in 3rd and 5s, be in 3rd and 4s. That's why, Brees is, the Hall of Famer. You trust him in those situations. And so, they had a very conservative game plan. And again, they were going against this sort of too high safety defense, almost the entire football game. The Vikings did not play that much man to man. Probably didn't help that Xavier Rhodes wasn't playing. And a couple other guys that were out. And so they decided to take a little more conservative approach. And the Saints sort of, abided by that. So, okay, if you guys are going to play deep, we're going to be, throw the ball underneath, Brees threw for a 5 yard average, probably, 120 yards. I'm not even sure when the last time Brees probably threw for 120 yards, in a game, and, run the ball in very short, passes. And at the end of the day, the Vikings sort of beat themselves with the fumble and with the interception. I
call that the Jim McMahon win. Right there. The throw for 120 yards and get a victory.
Well, what's amazing, they had like on a classic game, I think it was like last off season or something. They showed like an 85 Bears game, and I'm looking back and watching them play, and it was like, McMahon did not throw for a lot of yards. It was like rely on that defense. He felt like they're going to get a defensive touchdown like every single game, and obviously they had Walter Payton in the backfield, and it was like handoff. Throw the ball really, really deep to Willie Galt, or a flat route to a tight end. Like that was basically their offense. Hand the ball off, a go route, and a flat route. And it was like those 3 plays, watching that football, watching the old Bears game from the early mid 80s.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't have put my money down on Drew Brees for 120 yards. I would not have taken the under last night with Xavier Rhodes missing, but playing the situations that's how it's done.
I was going to say, if you would have said, Drew Brees is going to have 120 yards passing, at 5 yards, and throw an interception, by the way, his first interception of the year. Mm-hmm. And you're going to give up 3.7 per carry running the football. Asked Mike Zimmer before the game, would you take that? You would take that every single time. Anytime Drew Brees throws for under 300 yards, you got to be pretty dang happy, in particular, in a dome. And again, I think the defense did their job and then some. They got a turnover. They held Brees in check. They held the running game for the most part in check. And, not a lot of big plays there, for the Saints. And they said the Vikings, I felt like they were just, trying to make too many plays almost and made a couple bad ones that really cost them.
And we have a saying on this podcast, Sage, that was actually born of Stephon Diggs' excellence, which is fantasy stats are not real football. And I think last night's a great example. And Drew Brees, even last year, his yards total is down by like 1,000 yards almost from some of his 5,000 yard years. And he deserved to be in the MVP conversation because they were winning a lot more. They were running the ball more successfully. So how a quarterback plays versus those numbers don't always match up very well. And I thought that Brees, aside from the interception, he played well in the game. It was just that they didn't need him to do any more than he did, and they get the win. So let me give you.
Well, by the way, you're going to talk about stats. I think when you're talking about football in general, and just sports in general, and media people, we love to just talk about statistics, stats. And I've come to the sort of conclusion. It's amazing how much stats sort of lie, because you don't know how the game flow was. And actually for radio this weekend, I called the Oklahoma versus Kansas State game, down in Norman, Oklahoma on Saturday afternoon. Well, Oklahoma earlier in the year, they played against Army and beat Army, in a really close game at the end. I think it even went to overtime. All right. Oklahoma ran 40 plays the entire game. Army had 78 rushes in the game, right? They ran like 90 some plays or something like that, right? So, who had more yards and who had this and who had that at the end of the day? What's the score? Who's winning? When are they winning? Who had the turnovers? Those types of things. We always get wrapped up in yards per carry and yards per attempt and quarterback rating and all these things. But when you look at the flow of a football game, one of the reasons the Saints didn't have great statistics is they didn't need to have great statistics. They sort of, again, as I said before, they sort of allowed, the Vikings to sort of lose that game, and they weren't going to do anything too risky. They're just going to sort of play their game. And if they would have been behind, I promise you Drew Brees probably would have thrown for 250 or 300 yards if they were behind, but they weren't the entire second half.
Yeah, I think it takes a sort of a deeper study of the numbers to get your clear picture, where you're looking at a lot of different things. And you've mentioned the third downs is a big thing where you can figure out. You look at how quarterbacks perform on third downs. You could just make the list out of the top 10 quarterbacks right by how they do on third down. There's a number of other statistics depending on what you're really looking for. Football Outsiders has a good one where they try to parse out the score, and so they remove some of the score effects and things like that. So there are attempts, but it can make it really tough when it's a game like last night. So last thing,
yeah, I think by the way, I think Blake Bortles has made a lot of money on NFL based off of these a lot of times phony statistics. And
35 touchdowns
not as much last year when they were. When they were winning a lot of football games, but in the years before that, they'd be behind 31-7 in the fourth quarter. And, he'd go 16 of 18 in the fourth quarter versus soft cover 2 defense and throw a couple of touchdowns. And the stats would look a lot better than they actually were. And, so, you gotta be careful with statistics and it's not all about that. At the end of the day, it's, obviously just about that final score. I do think turnovers, that is a statistic that will forever be very, very valuable, much more valuable than passing yards.
Mm-hmm. So let me just ask you one more thing here before we wrap up. Just big picture on this team. Are you still, after that loss, are you still buying them as legit contender or just fringe playoff team? Or I don't strike you as or you don't strike me as a panic button guy at this moment, but how's your sort of big picture feeling?
Well, panic for what? I mean, it's not like it's an airplane going down or something here. I think what I see as the Vikings as they're a flawed team. They're not the Rams. They have issues on different sort of various weaknesses on both sides of the football. And I think coaching could probably be better. By the way, I wasn't thrilled with the lack of tempo, when they were down 17 points, 3 scores there in the fourth quarter last night, and they're slowly moving the ball. They huddle up for a quarterback sneak, on the 1 yard line, which cost them like an extra 40 seconds. So, there's a lot of issues on the football team. I do think they look like, to me, that a team that'll win at the least 8 and at the most 10 football games this year. That's sort of how I see them. It's going to come down to, the Packers game. They have 5 division games left, Packers, and 1 against the Packers, 2 against the Bears, 2 against the Lions. How do those games, end up? And, I think we both know that, the Packers game, that time with, the way Aaron Rodgers plays, it always seems like it comes down to, does he create magic with the ball in his hands at the end of the game or not? And so, right. And the Bears are a good team. And so it's going to come down to a lot of close ball games. And last year they won these close ball games, and this year, they're struggling with them a little bit. And so it's always hard to tell, what's going to happen when you talk about 16 games at the end of the year, but it's going to come down to these close ball games, and either they make those plays or they don't. And last night they made the negative plays that gave the Saints the game.
All right. We will be back on Wednesday for another podcast, and one of the teams that is just a dream of journeyman quarterbacks, the Detroit Lions. I cannot wait for that. Sage, thanks for your time as always.
Sounds good.
And thank you all for listening to the Purple Podcast.
Suspect in court. I'm Ed Donahue with an AP News Minute. The man accused of killing 11 people at a synagogue in Pittsburgh, Robert Bowers, appeared briefly in court.
He's wearing a blue sweatshirt. He said very little, yes, and I think yes, sir, that kind of thing to the judge. And the marshals loosened half of his handcuffs so he could sign court papers.
That's the AP's Mark Scalfaro. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says President Trump will travel to Pittsburgh tomorrow.
The president is the grandfather of several Jewish grandchildren. His daughter is a Jewish American, and his son-in-law is a descendant of Holocaust survivors.
Federal prosecutors in Florida want no bail for a man accused of sending pipe bombs to prominent Democrats around the country. They say Cesar Sayoc is a risk to flight and a danger to the community. Meantime, police in Atlanta have reopened several streets as local and federal police look into a suspicious package found at a postal facility in downtown Atlanta. I'm Ed Donahue.